Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com. Dr. Richard Feynman said, "Have no respect whatsoever for authority. Forget who said it and instead look what he starts with, where he ends up, and ask yourself, is it reasonable?" And Albert Einstein said, "Blind trust in authority is the greatest enemy of the truth." But YouTube trusts authority. They put this propaganda banner on most of my videos. Climate change, United Nations. Climate change refers to long-term shifts in temperatures and weather patterns mainly caused by human activities, especially the burning of fossil fuels. Let's take a look and see if the United Nations is an authority which can be trusted. In 1988, the United Nations predicted that the Maldives would be completely underwater by the year 2018 and that they would run out of drinking water by the year 1992. But the Maldives are still there and they appear to be doing just fine. And in fact, the Maldives have actually grown as much as 8% in size over the past 60 years. But things weren't always this good in the Maldives. In 1837, some of the islands actually were disappearing into the sea. I don't think they had a lot of SUVs in the Maldives in 1837, so I am suspicious that the United Nations might not know what they're talking about. And then in 1989, the United Nations said we had to stop global warming by the year 2000 or entire nations would be wiped off the face of the earth. I'm pretty sure that didn't happen, and I'm pretty sure the United Nations has no clue what they're talking about. Now let's go back in time 20,000 years. Antarctic ice cores show that Earth was very cold and carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere were very low. And then the climate got much warmer, and I'm pretty sure that didn't have anything to do with the burning of fossil fuels. Earth was almost unlivable 20,000 years ago with low temperatures and low CO2 concentrations. Chicago and New York were buried under a mile of ice, as was much of Europe. And most of the regions which weren't covered with ice were an extreme desert at that time. Earth had very little forest 20,000 years ago when temperatures and CO2 levels were low. But now we have lots of forest and much less desert with higher temperatures and higher levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. That sounds like a good thing. But the United Nations says that climate change is caused by the burning of fossil fuels. Apparently, Fred Flintstone can take credit for the improvement in climate over the last 20,000 years. 20 years ago, the BBC reported that a 9,000-year-old city off the coast of India is now under 120 feet of water. According to United Nations theories, this must have been Fred Flintstone's fault. Now let's take a look at drought in the American West. 1,000 years ago, there was a 200-year-long drought. And then there were even more severe droughts during the 12th and 13th centuries. These droughts led to the disappearance of the Anasazi people. Prior to their disappearance near the end of the 13th century, they dominated the Southwest for a period of time much longer than the United States has been in existence. I'm pretty sure that the 70-year-long drought which wiped them out had nothing to do with the burning of fossil fuels. 6,000 years ago, there was little or no sea ice in the Arctic. July temperatures along the northern coastline of Russia may have been 2.5 to 7 degrees Celsius warmer than they are now. There was no permafrost and trees grew all the way to the edge of the Arctic Ocean. The current tree line is 80 to 100 kilometers further south than it was 5,000 years ago. The change in climate over the last 5,000 years had nothing to do with humans and nothing to do with the burning of fossil fuels. This is a fossilized giant sequoia stump near Florissant, Colorado, where I used to go to camp as a child. The only place giant sequoias grow now is in California. The climate has changed dramatically. This is a massive coral reef in what is now the West Texas desert. The climate has changed rather dramatically. The United Nations appears to have no clue what they're talking about. So why is YouTube contaminating my videos with the United Nations propaganda? In order to understand what the United Nations and YouTube are up to, we have to go back in time 100 years. Scientists recognized that the greatest problem facing humanity was a shortage of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. The lack of carbon dioxide greatly reduced crop yields. Scientific American did an experiment showing how crop yields could be greatly increased by piping carbon dioxide from industrial facilities into agricultural facilities. NASA satellites show that Earth has gotten much greener as carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere have increased over the last few decades. Over the past 60 years, wheat yields around the world have tripled as carbon dioxide has increased in the atmosphere. Over the past century, life expectancy for humans has doubled. Over the past 30 years, the share of the population which is undernourished has greatly declined. Over the past 70 years, extreme poverty has plummeted around the world. And over the past century, illiteracy has plummeted as well. So we might ask, what exactly is it that the United Nations is upset about? The key can be found in this New York Times article from 1969. The United Nations, the New York Times, and academics were openly talking about poisoning the food and water supply of third world countries in order to reduce population. The United Nations doesn't want the human population to thrive, they want it to decline. And thus the nonsensical barrage of propaganda from the United Nations about the burning of fossil fuels. There's no faster way to reduce population than make food and energy unaffordable and unavailable. The United Nations is pretending to care about people when in fact their agenda is the exact opposite. Toto's been pulling back the curtain on this evil for the past 14 years. You can visit him, Kyrie Caesar, Toki and Upala on the web at realclimatescience.com.